That's what 40 years in real estate will do to you.
Yeah, right.
Make you lose your hair and go right. So all of you dark-haired people, blonde.
All right. So this purchase agreement has evolved. When we started it, I started in 1974. It was one page, 8.5 by 11. That was the whole contract. I don't know how we.
And then it went to 2.
And then attorneys started getting into real estate, and that's why we have 16 pages now.
Sal, do you want to slice before you start? Or you
No, that's all right. I grabbed something. Everybody else can
Get the
eat
makeup.
while I
This is
talk.
big video. Get him some makeup.
Right.
By the way, it's very informal, so you can ask questions throughout the, I guess, discussion we're gonna have here. Grab your slice of pizza and, or 2, or 3.
I didn't know we're having pizza. I didn't have my salad.
Yeah, this is our lender, Ishmael supplied you guys with food.
Where's that pizza come from?
Big Nick's.
Big Nick's.
Big Nick's?
Big Nick.
Big Nick's is on Channel and Gaffney, right? Yes. Good pizza. I have to know where all the pizzas are, you know? Yes. So right, Sal, it's in our genetic code.
That's right. I never
Our name is.
ate a pizza I didn't like.
I can use a round of pizza.
I'll always do it.
Hey Sal, last night I was looking through some family photos. My wife was cleaning a closet. I came across a photo, damn it, I forgot to bring it with me. A photo of you, your whole family, your brother-in-law, and us when we met you in Rome.
Oh, yeah, at Harry's.
And who?
Harry's Bar.
Oh, that's right, Harry's
There's
Bar.
Harry's
in Rome.
Bar. Right there was the,
I got it, I'm gonna get it.
Wow.
You probably have a copy of it.
did I have gray hair then?
I don't, that was.
What was that,
probably-
05?
No, it could be. Could it be 05?
I don't know.
It could be. When were you in Italy last?
That was the only time I was in Italy.
Okay, well, I've been there a few times, so it must have been 05.
I don't know.
Yeah, I got a nice photo here. Harry's Bar, huh?
That was Harry's Bar.
And what happened to your brother-in-law? I saw him in the photo.
Lee passed away. He died. Yeah. Mhm.
What was his name?
Got Lee Dworshak. He got in a motorcycle accident.
He died in a motorcycle accident?
Well, not in it. He paralyzed himself and then he slowly died.
I didn't even
So I
know.
put a bummer on this class.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, can you hear me from back there?
Yep.
All right.
All you pizza lovers.
So, as I said, over the years, the residential purchase agreement has changed. And what I discovered is the best thing to do, this might be the only one you guys know about, is to adapt right away. Don't fight it, learn it. And this is something I always say, that the purchase agreement could be your best friend or your worst enemy. If you don't know what's in it, you're gonna paint yourself into a corner or your client into a corner, and then you're gonna be feeling real bad when you realize that you've got a tough situation on your hands because you didn't know the clauses in this contract. So I'm not gonna go over every single paragraph and every clause. The Board of Realtors, 2 times a year, they have an excellent instructor. I don't know if he does a half day or a full day on the purchase agreement, and I recommend you go. I don't know if it's free, sometimes it's a couple of bucks, but the guy's excellent and you'll understand it very, very well. He goes over it line by line. We don't have time to do that today. I'm gonna highlight some of the spots that I've seen our agents have some problems with. And then I'll tell you some real preliminary things. Like, first of all, before your client signs any contract to purchase or to list, you need to get your client to sign the agency disclosure, right? The CAR, California law, that's the first thing you need to do. There's 3 types of agents in California. Agent who represents a buyer exclusively, an agent who represents a seller exclusively, and the agent or company that represents both the buyer and the seller at the same time. If it's my listing and you sell it, we're a dual agent. I don't even know your client, you don't know my client, but the law says we're a dual agent. And
So dual agency also means that if I have a listing and she closes it with a buyer under the same brokerage, that
Right.
means.
dual agent.
Oh.
And of course, if you have a listing and you bring the buyer, you're still a dual agent. Of course, your fiduciary relationship is extremely high there. That's why we want to be careful when we are personally representing both people. We have to be extremely careful that we walk the line right down the middle so that you don't end up getting in trouble with one or both of your clients and the judge. All right, so the first thing you do is you explain agency to your client when you're gonna write an offer and have them sign it. Everything that they sign, they need to have a copy of immediately when they leave your presence. Now, a lot of times today, people are signing things electronically, so obviously, if they sign something electronically, they have a copy on their computer. But if they come to the office to sign it, it's easy enough for you to make a Xerox copy. If you go to their house for them to make the offer, you need to bring 2 copies of everything, because you've got to leave one with them when you walk away. So those are fundamental things you need to know. The other thing that right after the agency disclosure, you should, before they sign the offer or you talk about the offer, they can sign this possibility of representing more than one buyer or seller. This came about a few years ago when a client got disgruntled with a real estate company. Let's say that I have a listing and Ron has a buyer and Al has a buyer, and we're all in the same office. And my seller doesn't take Ron's offer, he takes Al's offer. And then we're a dual agent, all of us are dual agents. So Ron's buyer got upset and said, wait a minute, I don't understand this. You're a dual agent helping me, Keller Williams is a dual agent helping me, Sal's a dual agent helping me. Why didn't I get the house? You guys didn't represent me very well, and I'm gonna sue you for that. Well, what this is saying is the seller has the right to choose. He can take a lower offer, he can take a longer escrow, a smaller deposit, smaller down. The seller can take whatever they want. So just because we're a dual agent with a buyer and a seller doesn't mean that every buyer can be assured of being the winner in that contract. So in signing this, they're acknowledging that they understand that you don't have control over what the seller does, and our company may have other buyers for that property, and the seller might accept one of our other agents' offers instead of yours. So this kind of helps to shield you against the irrational thinking that it's your fault that that the buyer didn't get the property. Because clearly you can't control that. Although you're going to encourage them to write the best offer they can. Strongest deposit, the stronger price, the strongest down, all the best terms that you can get them to agree to. So they'll have the best chance of getting accepted. Any questions on those 2 forms?
So this will protect the buyer, no, the seller, in case the seller accepts the lower.
Well, no, it's not going to protect the seller. It's really going to protect you and your real estate company.
Okay.
Because you've disclosed to the buyer that there could be other agents with other offers that may be accepted above yours.
Mhm.
And you understand that and you consent to that, and you don't blame me if your offer doesn't get accepted. It really doesn't relieve the seller, because the seller has no liability to any buyer.
Right.
And by the way, this is a side thing that is interesting. If you're new, you may not know it.
Yeah.
When a seller puts a property on the market, he's not obligated to sell it. You know, you can bring him an all cash offer way over the price, as is with a 5-day escrow. The cash is in the suitcase right next to you. He doesn't have to take your offer. When he lists the property, it is merely a offering to sell, not a commitment to sell. So a seller doesn't even have to respond to your buyer's offer. However, it's very unusual that a listing agent's not going to cooperate and get you some kind of an answer, even if it's only an initial on the bottom saying rejected, just so you know it was presented, but they have no obligation to accept it, respond to it, counter, or anything. Okay, that's another reason to write your best offers. And so from there, we can get to the purchase agreement, the meat and potatoes. Writing the offer the best you can thoroughly is important. And as a listing agent, when I see an offer from you, if I see things left blank where they shouldn't be blank, or I see no initials where there ought to be initials, or something, a discrepancy in here that leads me to believe you don't know what you're doing, I'm less likely to work with you and your buyer than I will with another agent who has completed his purchase agreement properly. He submitted a pre-approval or pre-qualification letter from a lender, brought a copy of their bank account with a proof of funds, whether it's all cash or certainly enough for the down payment and additional monies for closing costs. So in writing a good offer, that's the rest of it. You need to bring the paper with you to show that your buyer is ready, willing, and able to perform on the contract. Easy, right? Okay. So first of all, on the purchase agreement, it must be dated. And who's ever buying, if there's 2 or 3 people, they all have to be on that top line on buyer. You don't want to take an offer from like say partners, one partner, or husband and wife, and just the wife signs or just the husband, and then you put their name on the contract, but they're not on the bottom on the signatures. So all buyers should be on the top and all buyers should be signing. Now, if there are too many buyers, 4 or something, 5, there are extra forms that CAR provides for additional buyers, or if there's a lot of sellers, so that everybody can sign. But you can't take a shortcut just because you think there's not enough room on the top line for all the buyers. You got to get everybody in, even if you say all buyers on additional addendum. All right. There you go. And obviously the full address, the city, the county, the zip. I always put assessor's parcel number in. You know, one time sold a property on Kirkhoff, and the title company sold my buyer the house next door. It was 1 number off on the assessor's parcel number. Now, it was a good title company. So when we found out, after I nearly had a heart attack, how do I tell my client he doesn't own his house? And then how do I tell the neighbor that we sold it to somebody else? So the title company just fixed it, which a good title company will correct it right away. But it's a good idea to be thorough with your address and your assessor's parcel number. The houses were identical. They were like 2 25-footers that the developer bought 2 lots. You built the same house on each lot, and the address was 2 digits off, and the assessor's number was 1 digit off. So they made a mistake. It happens. All right. Now, something that's very important, and I see a lot of agents are not thorough with this, so I'm going to spend some time if you don't understand. Paragraph 2B, confirmation. Sometimes some new agents get mixed up between agency disclosure and agency confirmation. The agency disclosure is merely telling your client, disclosing the types of agency in California. 3 of them, right? Exclusively the buyer, exclusively the seller, or a dual agent. By the way, some states don't have dual agency. So California does. But agency confirmation, go ahead.
How does that work if, say, they work for the same company, like you and me,
In other states?
Yeah, in other
Well,
states.
sometimes they go so far as to simply send them to another company. Now, they may have a relationship with the other company, but if they strictly do not allow a dual agency, then they only represent the buyers or they only represent the sellers. Which we don't have to worry about that because we're a little more progressive here in California. We're very progressive in California. So agency confirmation is confirming the type of agency that the agents have with the clients in this contract. So you'll notice the seller brokerage firm, whoever has the listing is the seller's brokerage firm. So the name of that company would be under that seller's brokerage firm. So if you're writing an offer and you're with Keller Williams LA Harbor and you're writing an offer on, I don't know, all the offices closed. Is Remax still open? All right, Remax is still running. They're still running for now. So it would be Remax Realty that you would put in there. And then you have to put a check in the box, even though it seems redundant, that's the seller's, representing the seller. And now you'll have the office license number at the end of that sentence. And the next sentence, they want you to name the actual agent of that office that is the listing agent for the seller. So you put that agent's name in there. And if it's like Fred DiBernardo Realty, you would put DiBernardo Realty as the company, Fred DiBernardo as the agent. And then you'd put his personal license number. In his case, I think it's the same number because he's a broker agent. All right, so then under you're writing the offer, so you're representing the buyer. So you've got buyer's brokerage firm. Write out Keller Williams Realty LA Harbor, because there's a lot of Keller Williams. There's Keller Williams Palos Verdes, Keller Williams Long Beach, Keller Williams Coastal or Torrance, and we're all over the place. And we're not dual agents with those other Keller Williams offices. We're only dual agents with agents under Gordon's license number here, 015-010-84. So if it's Keller Williams Palos Verdes, we're not dual agents. They're representing the seller exclusively, and we would be representing the buyers who are representing the buyer exclusively. Is that clear? Anybody a little bit mixed up?
So you would just check that box, both the buyer and the seller box, dual agent.
If it's the same company, you would do a dual agency. If it was, I'm the listing and you're the selling agent, then we'd have Keller Williams LA Harbor in both companies, and we'd have the box check both the buyer and the seller. But when it's a different Keller Williams or a Remax or Caldwell or Expo or whoever, then you put you put their numbers in there, their company number, and you find that in the listing. You can find it at CAR too. So there's no reason to not have the full license numbers. All right, good. Okay. Then obviously sale price, you're going to, it's a matter of you showing your buyer comps, and depending on what his qualifying abilities are, you write in your offer number. Now, escrow, close of escrow, 30 days are pretty common today, but there were times, sometimes if it's all cash, it might be 15 or 21 days. If it's an investor, maybe a flipper buying something all cash, he might have a 15-day escrow. That's kind of short because you've got the prelim and that's about it, the inspection and the prelim and the cash. Most deals, you'll be working with buyers who have 5, 10, 20% down. And a good lender can do a deal in 30 days. But here's the thing you might keep in mind: if you've got a buyer that is a tenant of an apartment and he needs to give a 30-day notice, is to make sure you discuss this with them, because in a 30-day escrow, they may not have full approval for, say, 17 to 21 days into that 30 days. And your buyer probably wouldn't want to give his landlord a 30-day notice at the beginning of escrow, because he may not be approved at the end when he has to move out of his apartment. So I tell you this, it's one of the ways you counsel your client. You need to think ahead. Sometimes I explain it in my disclosure class, is like leading your client through a minefield, a war minefield. You don't want to step on a mine. He wasn't prepared to be paying a mortgage payment and rent for 1 month each. So you want to talk with him, make sure, it could be he's renting from a friend that he doesn't need to give a 30-day notice, or he's living at home, or they are living at home and they don't need to give a 30-day notice. But it's a conversation you should have. And sometimes that person might want a 45-day escrow so that maybe gets approved in 3 weeks, gives a 30-day notice, closes in 3 weeks, and then takes a week to move in. See how smoothly that could work? So my point is, think ahead. You come to these classes. If you're new, you're going to be talking to your mentors, your coaches, so that you know what you're doing and you're prepared to lead your client confidently through an escrow. Okay. So there's something about 30 days. They could be a little shorter if they're able to move quicker and the lender is, and they could be a little longer if you need it. Always get your buyer pre-qualified or pre-approved before you write an offer. There was a time when we might get excited. We're on an open house. We meet somebody, they walk in, they want to buy it. We have them sign the offer and we submit it and the seller accepts it. We don't know anything about the buyer. He's got bad credit. He doesn't have enough money in the bank. You know, we don't do that anymore. We now are professional, thorough, and you want to counsel your client. You want to see their bank account. You want them to be pre-qualified. If you can, try to get them to pre-qualify with your lender, somebody you work with, somebody that you trust, because many lenders will just write a pre-qual letter for anybody. Like we used to just write an offer for anybody, just throw mud on the wall, let's see if it sticks. And some lenders will do that. Well, you want a pre-qual, here you go, yeah, we can give you this loan. So if you're working with a lender, you know, you're more likely to get an honest answer, and if they need to clean up their credit, he can put them in line with someone who will get things off of their credit, maybe move their credit from a 690 to a 730, and it makes a difference in interest rates. All right, any questions on? No. All right, deposit. Yeah, what?
It was 2D. Possible representation of more than one buyer and seller. And you check that off.
Well, you know what, because that's the second form I told you to have signed. Possibility of representing more than one buyer or seller. Remember, that is when you said, you asked me, does that protect the seller? No, this is to protect you and the company that you informed your buyer There
Okay.
could be other agents in my company
Oh, okay.
writing offers and they may
So you
win.
check that box only when you have to.
Well, you should, no, this one is for every buyer, whether it's a dual, this is for any buyer you represent, just like this. It doesn't really have to do with the dual agency. Anytime you're writing an offer for a buyer, whether it's our listing or not, you want to get these forms signed.
I think when you fill it out, because this whole packet like comes up, it's automatically checked for you because it's in the packet.
Right, the zip forms will give you that form automatically. But I tell you what it is so that you know. Sometimes your buyer will not be sophisticated and they'll just sign everything you put in front of them. But if you have a knowledgeable buyer and they want to know what they're doing and what they're spending, you have to be able to explain what these forms are and why. Otherwise, they're not going to have confidence in you. If you're, I don't know, but just sign it. It's not good today. Buyers are more sophisticated.
What about on 2C where it says more than one brokerage represents seller and buyer?
Well, sometimes, for example, Mike Harper and Pete Haslevac. We have an agent in our office, Pete Haslevac, and Keller Williams PV has an agent, Mike Harper, both top agents, but they're kind of partners and they work together. And so whenever they do a deal, they have to tell their buyer or their seller, both our companies are representing you.
Okay.
And for example, if I have the listing and Pete Haslevac, who's in our office, has the buyer, along with Mike Harper, who has half of the buyer with Keller Williams PV, we have to explain to everybody that, Pete and Sal are representing dual agency, but Mike is representing the buyer and, so it gets, and that's why these have these boxes here. Because, and you might think it sounds silly, but here's kind of the main thing that runs through the entire contract. We're at Keller Williams, we're real careful that you don't get in trouble. And we don't have a lot of problems with our clients, mainly because we train our agents and we have good agents, solid, cultural, ethical agents that do the right thing. The only time we have some problems is when we get into territory you don't know and you try to answer it. And when something isn't disclosed properly, that should be, and a buyer or seller is disgruntled, they'll look for whatever reason to point the finger at you or at us. So the more you know and you understand, the better you can explain it. You'll have disclosures and clarifications and you'll have everything signed, no verbal. It's one thing you learn in real estate. There's no verbal agreements that can be enforced. So somebody telling you something it doesn't mean it's so. So that's what that one is.
Thank you.
You can have different offices representing one buyer or one seller. All right, so moving right along to initial deposit. You should get the best deposit you can. And 3% of the offering price is the target. And if you're offering $1 million, $30,000 deposit is reasonable. If 750, you might have a $20,000, $21,000, $24,000 deposit. So about 3%. What you certainly don't want like 1% or anything under 2%. Sometimes a buyer doesn't have all that 3% available this week to put into escrow, because that deposit will go into escrow within 3 days of acceptance. And if an offer is accepted, the seller and everybody in escrow is going to expect your client's money to be in escrow within 3 days. Sometimes maybe somebody's got to get money out of a 401k or some kind of a retirement plan or some kind of a trust. It's going to take 5 days or 7 days or something. And they say, well, I can give you 2% now and 1% more in 10 days. All right, you could say that. But you shouldn't be going in on $1 million deal with a $5,000 or $10,000 deposit. Your buyer doesn't look very strong, doesn't look like he's serious, right? So aim for 3% deposit, make sure they have it readily available. And by the way, well, I guess when I'll get down to I'll tell you that when I get down to the remainder. So then you put in the loan amount. It's not uncommon today. I think if you were at the meeting yesterday, they talked to us about FHA financing, VA financing, and conventional financing. Well, VA financing, a buyer could buy with 0 down, 100% finance if they qualify, and they would just have closing costs. FHA buyer can buy with as little as 3.5% down, provided they're qualified and the property is qualified. But there's conventional loans that are with 5% down. It's a 95% loan. There's 90% loans. Obviously, there's 80% loans and smaller. Obviously, you can always borrow less than they're willing to give you. Sometimes there's even conventional financing available with 3% down for the buyer. But this buyer's got to be just superb. Maybe a giant CEO, of Google or something, buku bucks, and they qualify for a 97% loan very easily. So there are such loans occasionally, but they're gonna have to qualify. That's why you always want to get your buyer qualified with a lender of your choosing. All right, moving on to the remainder of the down payment. Now, today, as I told you earlier, we submit our offer with a copy of our client's bank statement. Granted, we would white out their account number or their social security number, but something's got to show their name, their address, and their money. So a bank statement is a good way to do that. And we should be showing if there's going to be, let's see, $150,000 down on this property in our example, they're gonna need 150,000 and maybe another 15 to close, 10 to 15,000 to close. So they should be showing 165 or more money. If, for example, they do show the 165,000, and then in the course of escrow, maybe they go out and they buy a bunch of furniture and washer and dryer, and they're getting all excited about furnishing their house. And it comes time they get approved for the loan. It comes time to close. If they're short on money, they can lose their deposit, because that's no excuse to say, oh, I don't have that money anymore. It's not a contingency. Your buyer's got to have all of that money. In fact, whatever he needs. If, for example, he has impounds, he has to, and his closing cost is 18,000, he needs to have all that money to close. So you want to counsel your people with a lender that you know, that you rely on, that is knowledgeable and is going to give good, solid advice to you and your client. When I was new, 2 things that I did is I hung out with an escrow officer that was very knowledgeable, and whenever she was a little slow, I would bend her ear. What do I do? What do I do? How do you do this? How do you do that? What happens if this? And I talked to my broker, who was my mentor, who would coach me through my first 10 transactions, and also a lender that I liked at that time. And I would call him almost daily. What's the rate today? What are the points? What is the ratio? There's qualifying ratios. You don't have to know how to do the financing, but you should know what the rates are. If there's any points, can you buy down the rate? If the rate seem to be stable for a week or so, is it going to be going up? Is it going down? You can't like not be involved in the lending part of it because you're doing the offer part. The more you know, the better the agent you're going to be, and more successful at closing what you open, what you start, because you know what's going on. So some agents don't want to be bothered with the loan. Oh, the lender said he's okay. I want to know what are his qualifying ratios. In other words, you know, some lenders on an FHA loan, they'll let a buyer qualify spending 50% of their monthly gross income. If they're grossing 10 grand a month, FHA lender may allow them to pay $5,000 in like principal, interest, tax, and insurance. That's high amount of money, because you make 10,000 a month. What do you come home with? 7, 8, not even 8, 75, right? So if you got 75 coming home and 5 going out on principal, interest, tax, and insurance, you've now got 2,500 for your car, your gas, your medical, your groceries, your utilities. So but they'll qualify him if he doesn't have a great deal of debt and he's got good credit. So you should also look into learning that stuff from our in-office mortgage people. They're happy to spend time with you because they know if they give you knowledge and service, you're going to bring them the loan, and they help you and you help them. Right? All right. All right, so some of the more important.
So can I ask you one question?
Sure.
So where you put like not to exceed and you want to put a certain percentage, you just kind of go by what the percentage is around that time and add some to it? Like, how do you know?
Yeah,
I don't
all
know.
right, that's a good question. In fact, I highlighted it, but I didn't address it. The other day, I don't know if it was, I think it was Ish that said this, and this is something that I do too. When I'm talking to my buyer and I say, okay, you know, they go, I want to look at, you know, 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses no higher than $900,000. Okay, I'm gonna search and see what part of how do you like the Highlands? Do you like Vista del Oro? You like Point Fermin? What do you like? And he said, well, everything, anything above Gaffey, you know. All right, so we go looking at houses. But I also want to know what his income is and what his down payment's going to be. So I can give him an idea with my calculator. My mortgage calculator will tell me if he buys a $900,000 house with 10% down, he's going to have a $810,000 loan. Today, it might be 6, I don't know, 6 1/4 for 8. Does that fall into? So, and I can do the calculations. If rates are 6 1/4, I might calculate 6 1/2. I was kind of, and then I'll tell them, hey, how does this payment feel? Oh yeah, I can do that because I'm grossing this, I'm taking home that. All right, so I don't try to cut it right to because I know that rate can change. And I know he's going to be happier if it's $25 less a month, but he's not going to be happy if I quote him a number and it's $30 or $50 or $75 a month more. So I usually will put in the rate of today, maybe plus 1/4. Like I did 6 3/4 when I prepared this, because the rates were around 6 1/4, 6 1/2. And you might as well just tell them, you know what Al was saying at the beginning of class is I remember I started in 1974 and the rates just went up in 1974 now to about 10.5%. Now, it sounds bad to you, but remember houses were $40,000 and $50,000 back. You know, we had stagecoaches in 74. So houses were 40, 50, 60,000 in San Pedro. You go in PV, they're 100, you know. So it was a different time, but just the same, the rates had been like 8%. Now they went to 10.5. And you know what? Sal Sorrentino was in the office at that time and Leo Rippo, and I didn't know any better. So I sat open house and I met you and I go, oh, you want to buy a house? You want, okay, great. How much can you pay? And I say, okay, well, the rate's 10.5 and this is your payment. How does that sound? Okay, sign right here. But they had this limiting philosophy. Oh, rates went up from 8 to 10. I'm never going to sell anything. I was so dumb. I didn't know that it was a high rate. And so people just bought houses from me. So sometimes you have your own limited thinking. Just tell somebody, hey, and sometimes you tell them the payment and you don't go with the rate first. You scare the heck out of them. But if you say, well, you know, 20% down on 900, you got 20% down. This your payment's going to be about, and I don't know what it would be. I can't calculate. But, and they go, okay, so great. I calculate at 6 3/4%. I didn't scare the heck out of them by saying, you know, I hate to tell you this, but the rate is 6 3/4%. Are you sure you want to buy? You know, so you want to, you know, you want to tell them the truth, but you don't have to scare them away. And if they say, I can't afford that, we either raise the down payment, lower the price, or keep searching until the rates get better. Or you know what? I'm aware of a transaction where a seller sold a home for $975,000 and they gave the buyer $25,000 to buy down their interest rate, about 0.5%. So sometimes you ask, and especially the market is getting where you can negotiate more with a seller. You don't have 5 to 10 offers over full price. Sellers are waiting 30, 40, 50, 60 days to sell, and they're now more receptive to negotiating. You might ask, well, tell your buyer, well, what if we could get you a 6% interest and this was the payment? And they go, oh, okay, I can do that. Well, great. So you go to your lender and say, Ish, what's the rate? Well, they're 6.5. What's it going to take to get to 6%? And he might say, I can't get all the way down, but 3 points or 2 points. Well, 2 points might be 20 grand. You can ask the seller, pay $20,000 of the seller's closing cost, the buyer's closing cost, in order to get a 0.5% lower interest rate, so the buyer will buy your house. So you see, you want to be thinking, how can I make this puzzle fit like a Rubik's Cube, right? You got to move it around until you find it where it'll fit, and you got a deal. So that's why I say I'd rather be in here telling you this stuff, opening your mind to all the possibilities, rather than talking about every single line. You need to read it, you need to understand it, and there's a book at the board on this purchase agreement you can buy. I had one and I refer to it often. Now it's outdated because this is a new purchase agreement. But the classes at the board are important for you to go to, and that book is important. If you know this, you're going to be ahead of a lot of agents if you understand the contract. All right. So there was credits on the top of page 2. Usually, if you're going to ask for a credit for repairs, you don't want to ask ahead of time for something. Now, if you need money to buy down the rate, you might as well ask for it right up front to tell your seller, look, we'll give you this price, but we need 20 grand credit to buy down the rate, and here's a free qual letter. My buyer can do this. But if you have plans of doing a physical inspection and asking for a monetary credit or for some repairs, you don't want to put it in the first offer. You want your first offer to look as clean, it's like the honeymoon, you know, like perfect. You know, you don't go throw in the garbage yet. We're going to make a good clean offer, the best deposit, the best price, the largest down, a good, strong qualifying lender, proof of fund. You go in like you're just the greatest, cleanest, and then if after your inspection, you see that it needs a roof or it's infested with termites, or faucets are broken or windows are broken. Then after the inspection, you can ask for repairs in your request for repairs or a monetary credit towards closing costs in lieu of those repairs. Write this down. The only thing is you cannot get more money from the seller than what your closing cost is going to equal. Say, for example, you don't need a credit from the seller for the reduced points. So, and you're not going to impound taxes. So your closing costs are, say, 10 grand besides your down payment. Down payment of, say, 150 and 10 grand, 160. Well, you do a physical inspection and you find out that the roof is shot, and a new roof is going to be 25 grand, and you've got some electrical problems, some plumbing problems. It's going to take heating problems. It's going to take another 5 grand to replace or fix those things. There's $30,000 there, and so you ask for $30,000 credit towards closing costs, and the seller agrees, and then you go to close escrow, and there's 20 grand left over. The lender won't let your buyer have it. Is right. And who's your buyer going to blame? Who's your buyer going to burn at the stake? You. So you gotta realize that you can't get any more money than the closing cost. Now, what you might do in that case, you're not getting the money to do the repairs, but you might say, all right, then we're going to use 15 of that to buy down the interest rate 0.5% or 0.25%. So you could use all the money, but you can't get it in your hand for those repairs. So sometimes you might just say, I want a new furnace. I want these plumbing things repaired, and I want a $20,000 or $15,000 credit on the roof, or 10, whatever you can get. Or 10,000 price reduction and a 10,000 credit. Do you see, once again, use your imagination. How can we work this around to where we keep the deal together and it's a win-win for the buyer and for the seller and you. Win-win for you too. All right. So you don't always ask for money up front unless you need it, absolutely need it for closing costs. Then you might as well just make it clear to the seller. We got the down, we don't have the closing. In order to give you this price, we need you to pay the closing for the buyer. And sometimes they'll do it. If you don't ask, you'll never know. And also it could take your second, third, or fourth offer, but your buyer knows you're working for them and they're going to stick with you because you're duking it out for them.
Generally speaking, say on $1 million house, can we safely say that the closing costs are 3%, 4%, 5%?
Well, closing costs,
Say on $1 million.
I would think 20 grand would be enough on if
Would
they
not?
got, would be.
Would be.
2% should be enough. But here's the thing. Who doesn't know what impound accounts are? Who doesn't know what impound accounts are? Impound, when your buyer puts 5% down or 10% down and they get a big loan, a 90 or 95% loan, the lender says, you're qualified, you have good credit, you have enough income, and we'll make you this loan, provided that you have your taxes collected by us monthly, so that we will pay it for you twice a year, so we know your taxes, because you're up to here in mortgage, so we will know that we're holding your tax money. So we're going to collect it every month from you. If it's $700 a month in taxes and you got a $3,500 mortgage payment, that's $4,200 you're giving the lender every month. Sometimes it's $4,300, it could be the insurance too, $100 a month for a $1,200 a year fire policy. So those are called impound account. The bank says you have to let me collect your taxes from you monthly. And part of this impound account is you're going to give me 5 months of taxes at the close of escrow. So beside your $10,000 or $12,000 closing costs for escrow, title, lender, et cetera, whatever your fees are, prorations, HOA dues, they're going to take, if it's $700 a month times 5 months, that's $3,500 more from your buyer for closing costs. On top of your 12, there's 15,500. So on $1 million, you couldn't close with 10 grand. It's probably going to be 1.5% to 2%, 15 to 20 grand, 2%. But if there's impounds, it could be 2.5%, 3%, besides the down payment. So it's not always the same, but we're telling you this so that you're aware of when you counsel your client, you're taking into account, oh, I need to check with them on this, check with them, how quickly can they move out of their apartment? Do they need to give a 30-day notice? Do they have their closing costs now? Do they know what their credit score is? When you get them pre-qualified with your lender will pull a credit report and they'll tell you how they look. And the lower the score, sometimes they won't get a loan. Sometimes they'll pay 7.25% because they've got a 650 credit score rather than a 750. So it's important to know that. All right? Any questions? No? I've already told you to show your verification of cash. Let's go down to, page 2, L1, all the way on the left side, down third green line, it says L1. If you have a buyer who is buying cash, then they can mark this, no loan contingency. And below it, L2, no appraisal contingency. I have a duplex on Aldine Court right now in San Pedro that is a total fixer. A bank won't even make a loan on it. It's that bad. They've got plaster falling off the walls, and it's vacant, the utilities are off, the sewer line is disconnected, there's some steps that are gone, you walk out the door, you fall 20 feet to the ground. There's no lender will loan on this thing. So when it's got to be a cash offer, and the only kind of people are going to go for a property like this are flippers or investors, developers, contractors who know what they're doing. So whenever I get an offer and they say it's cash, I make sure that I say no loan contingency and no appraisal contingency, because sometimes they're going for a hard money loan, which they still may want to look at the building. Usually the hard money lender will criticize the building. And sometimes a buyer can say, well, I'm buying it all cash, but I left my appraisal contingency in there and the appraisal didn't come in. No. If you're buying cash, you have no loan contingency, you have no appraisal contingency. On this property, the only contingency, it would be, you can inspect it and disapprove it or approve it, but there's no other contingency. Title and condition. Period.
You mentioned the word hard money. Maybe we should explain what that is. Anybody know what hard money is?
Hard money, cold cash. What hard money is there are lenders out there that will charge an exorbitant amount of interest for a short-term loan, a higher risk loan. And they usually make those loans, it's like, they're not loan sharks, but you know, you can be paying 10 or more percent interest, 10, sometimes you pay points too. Say you're borrowing $1 million to buy a house that's worth $1.8 million, but you're getting it for $1 million because it needs a new roof and the air conditioning's broken and the heater's broken and it's filthy inside, the carpets are worn out, and maybe it's gonna take 300,000 to kind of put it into shape to get 1.8 out of it, all right? Well, a hard money lender might give you a $1 million loan, but it could be like 10% interest only for 6 months, and maybe a couple of points too. So it's very expensive, and they usually only give those loans to somebody with a track record that has been buying and selling, flipping. So it's expensive money, but you don't go through a bank. And what else? Sometimes they'll put the lien on the house.
And they secure it that way.
They'll secure it on the house, but it's not a bank.
And there's a place for them in this society.
Yeah, right. Because when a knowledgeable person goes, why should I invest my $100 or my $1 million? I'll keep my $1 million, I'll use his $1 million, I'll pay him 10% interest. I'll still make 200 net at the end of this. So, and I've got very little risk. And the lender, of course, he has a good track record with that developer. And also there's the property. It's always going to be worth something. And worst case, he takes the property, he paints it and sells it and gets his money back. Okay, that's hard money. Okay, I told you about no loan and no appraisal. That's the only time. Now, last year when things were really tough, where there were multiple offers and over full price offers on almost all good properties, a lot of buyers were removing their appraisal contingencies. Couple of times they got caught. You buy it for $1 million, it appraises for $950. You have to put up the other 50 grand. Your buyer does. So there were some times when they didn't have it. So what they had to do, instead of getting an 80% loan, they had to take a 90 or an 85% loan, do impounds and pay PMI. Well, I didn't even tell them about PMI. Private mortgage insurance. When a lender loans your buyer money over 80%, they get paid. Well, they actually don't get paid. The borrower has to pay for an insurance policy on the loan, and it's called PMI or MI, mortgage insurance, or but private mortgage insurance, PMI, which there's a company that says, well, this buyer is a higher risk borrower. He's got a 95% loan, 90 or 95% loan. There's very little equity in the house. These are the guys that there's a 60% chance higher that they're going to belly up and we're going to have to take the house back. So the insurance company insures the bank. Well, I'll cover 15% of that. So if you have to take it back, I'll give you 15%, you 80%, you've got a 20% margin of error. So the borrower pays the mortgage company to insure the lender for the difference in equity. That's not there because it was a low down, it was a higher risk loan. That's why FHA has PMI, because it's a 97.5% loan. I think VA has mortgage insurance because it's 100% loan. And that this reinforces what I told you. You need to talk to your lenders. How does this work? What's PMI? What's the impound? Why do they need that? So that when you have knowledge, it's valuable and your client's going to see you know what you're talking about, and you're going to hang on to them when they feel confident with your knowledge. Okay, L3, investigation of property. This is very important. The two biggest pitfalls that we have are not knowing the contract and the physical inspection and the condition of the property with disclosures. So you need to make sure your buyer does a professional physical inspection. And nowadays they run 500 to 900, unless it's a really big house. Sometimes, you know, you get one of the 8,000 square footers, you might have a $1,500. I haven't done those, but I understand that they get expensive. Most of my transactions are 600 to $1 million, $1.2 million, maybe $500, $600, $700 for the physical inspection. So you should know by asking people who's a good inspector, and you should have 3, 4, or 5, and you should find out what their rates are. Ray came in. Ray bought us breakfast the other day. What's the name of his company? Ray Gilliam. Gilliam. At any rate, you want to know who are the good inspectors. They're not going to blow the deal by scaring the heck out of the buyer. Oh, this house is falling down. The roof is terrible. You don't want to buy this. But you want a full disclosure so that they understand what they're buying, so they don't come back and you know, feel that you didn't take care of them. So you should know what the prices are, and you need at least 7-10 days or so to get your inspection in. Now, I told you already, it might be that your buyer is happy with the deal and the house doesn't need much and they don't ask for anything. Could be it needs repairs and they're going to ask for repairs, or they're going to ask for money to do the repairs. Sometimes asking for the money to do the repairs works out easier for you and the buyer and the seller, because a lot of times I found, my personal experience, when I was asking for, you know, you clear the drain line in the tub in the hall bathroom, and you fix the doorknob on the back door, and you patch the leak in the roof, and you know, repair the air conditioner that's not working well. You can have a list of things that are legitimate. But when you do your walkthrough in the last 5 to 7 days of escrow to verify that those things are done, sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, the buyer goes, when I asked you to repair this, I didn't mean for you to put bubble gum there. You know, this isn't what I thought you were going to do. Well, you just said plug the hole. I plugged the hole. You know, and all of a sudden you get into a beef. Or maybe it turns out that the air conditioner really couldn't be repaired, and they kind of just, once again, put a Band-Aid on it, and it's still, you know. So you might have at the end of your deal more problems than you had at the beginning. Whereas if you had said seller credit buyer $6,000 in lieu of any repairs of the air conditioning, the roof, the tub drain, the broken window, the broken lock, you know, and then the buyer, maybe he'll just spend that $5 or $6 grand on the air conditioner, and he'll fix the lock himself and the window, and it may not cover everything, but it's an easy way out of them having a beef at the end that this isn't what I thought you were going to do when I asked you to repair it. And another thing, if you're going to ask for repairs, because some people are going to insist on the repairs, or they want too much money, like, oh, you give me 20 grand and I'll fix the window. You know, seller going, that ain't gonna happen. So if you're gonna ask for repairs, you say air conditioning to be repaired by a licensed heat and air contractor, and the invoice to be supplied to the buyer. The bathroom drain to be cleared by a licensed plumber, and the invoice to be supplied to the buyer. The glass be repaired, maybe that's it. Smoke detectors installed, carbon monoxide, but a roof repair by a licensed roofer, and the receipt to be supplied to the to the buyer. Because sometimes when you seller to repair the air conditioning, seller to repair the drain, seller to repair the roof. So I went up there, I put tar on the roof, I repaired it just like you said. No, that's not what I meant. I don't know what you meant, but this is what you said, and it's what I did. So you should be real technical with your terminology. Sometimes I, as a listing agent, will get a request from repairs for you. And it's arbitrary. Like you and your client will write up and go, and you'll go, request of repairs. Item number 2 on page 4 of the inspection. Item 10, 11, and 12 on page 6 of the inspection. Item 20, 30, and 41 on page 11. And you didn't say, what do you want me to do about it? Yeah, I acknowledge, yeah, you're right. So what? Well, yeah, so what? They have to say, repair this or replace item, you know. And sometimes when they even say repair item number 2, I don't have my client just say yes. What I do is respond, and I'll say, seller will have the smoke detectors installed and carbon in the legal required areas. Or seller will have the drain cleared in the tub of the hallway bathroom. I kind of reiterate it specifically because if they meant something different than what I'm responding, then we can talk about it before we agree on what's going to be done. Am I clear? You understand? And because I've fallen into all these pitfalls, these landmines through my transactions over the years. So if you're overly prepared and you're technical and you deal with it right up front in writing, you're usually going to have a smoother deal. Everybody's going to be happier. And you know what I found out? Most people will ultimately agree with each other. Sometimes as a new agent, I was afraid to ask for something or afraid to refuse to do something. But most of the time, if you just say, hey, we'll do this, but we're not going to do this and this. Oh, okay. Oh, that was easy. So usually if you're upfront, transparent, 99% of the time, the deal is going to stay together and you're going to work it out. So there's your investigation. Any questions about investigations and repairs? You should, what I'm finding out now is if you suspect it needs more than a general physical inspection, you might want a roof inspection, an electrical inspection perhaps, and a sewer video. Let me tell you what happened to me. I had really good clients. I had like 3 transactions with them. And I sold them a house. It was beautiful, secluded, about 300 feet off of the street. So a long skinny lot with real big in the back. They loved it. And it was like a forest back there. We did a physical inspection. We got repairs or credits. After they moved in, they found there's a problem with their sewer line. I didn't think to suggest a sewer line video or cleanup.
You have lush backyard.
They had to replace the sewer line from the street to the house. So that wonderful secluded 300-foot back was 300 foot of sewer line.
There you go.
18 grand. I'm surprised they're still talking to me. But you see, I didn't think of it. So sometimes you want to say, hey, would you like a physical inspection? And also, if you like, you can get an electrical, sewer line video, and sewer line video 250 to 300, 275. Chimney sometimes, yeah. Old houses, it could be that the chimney is so cracked and worn that if you light a fire in it, you can, it can get sucked in through the cracks of the bricks. And that was the case of a house one time. I had that problem as well. So sometimes if you see the roof after a rain and you see all that gravel around the house from the roof, that black is just, you're saying, wow, that roof is just about at the end. You might want a roof inspection. If the air conditioner is making noise, you may want heat and air inspection besides your physical inspection. And if you have a pool and a spa, you for sure want them to pay extra. Let me tell you, when you're buying a house, today, you're buying a house with air conditioning and a pool, you know, you're gonna be paying 900 to $1 million and up, depending on what area you're in. So for the buyer to spend 500 on the inspection, 250 on the drain, another 100 or 2 on the pool and pool equipment, it's well worth it buying $1 million property to spend maybe $1,000 inspecting it. So you should advise them to do that.
I always felt this is a challenge about what you tell the client to have inspected. Because they could, I've had 2 doctors inspect one of my expensive houses. They spent $30,000 to inspect the house.
Wow.
And then they never bought it.
Oh,
They didn't buy it. So, you know, you want to do the chimney, you want to do radon. you know,
oh geez, yeah,
I mean,
some
they haven't
people,
inspected to death. That's always our challenge. We don't know
yeah,
what to
yeah,
tell our
that's true.
clients To have inspected, you know, it's not easy.
Patty's got a question, then I'll add to that. What,
No, I
Pat?
just wanna add to that, even the square footage, like doing an investigation, getting a surveyor to come survey the property. Because I've had issues with that twice.
Yeah,
So there is a form, we're just telling Jane, there's a form that you can give to your client. And it states there which inspections would you like, and they just check it off and say, okay. Then we'll just start looking, you know, if you have anybody, then go ahead and call them.
now,
There's
obviously,
a form that they have to sign saying, these are the items I want to check.
obviously, we can't forewarn you about everything, but what you're hearing here from experienced agents should stick in somewhere in the back of your brain to where when you go, oh, you know, I think I remember something about that. Go ask somebody, ask me, ask Gordon, ask the old timers in the office here. Hey, I got this issue. Everybody is willing to help you, keep you out of trouble. They want to see you successfully get your transaction done and stay out of trouble. Angel?
Yes, I've had a situation a few years back where the buyers, first-time home buyers, had their inspection and the drain was draining somewhat slow. And I said, would you like to have it cam inspected with the main drain? He said, no, that's fine, no, it's okay. Well, as soon as we closed escrow, their uncle said, oh, you need a new main drain.
Wow.
And I had recommended, if you want to have this done, and they said no. And then it came after me to say, hey, you didn't tell us.
Yeah.
That's why I use
So
that.
you have to
form.
have them sign a disclaimer that if they've been advised to do this, that, and the other, and they refused.
Yeah.
This way, they can't put the finger on it.
Or follow up with an email.
Yeah, and you always do it in writing with an email or a text. And when especially when after you're in real estate a few years, you get an inkling of if a client's going to be a little bit,
High maintenance.
yeah, a little more difficult than somebody else, a little, maybe not quite as reasonable. I do everything with text and emails. And you know, when I text something, I then grab that text, I email it to myself and I put it in the file. And I have a file in every escrow so that I know all the things we talked about. Now, it may not sound good to say, you know, they'll put the finger on you, but people, you know, they don't know who to turn to. And they keep thinking, geez, you made a lot of money and I have a problem. I think you should help me with my problem because I made you money. You know, but usually if you're right there for them and you're very thorough, a doctor friend of mine told me something. He said, you know, a doctor with a good bedside manner is less likely to get sued even if he makes a mistake than a doctor who has a poor bedside manner and didn't make a mistake. Which what it's saying is, if you're there for your people and they know you really are working for them, it's going to be less likely that they turn on you. Hey, my roof leaked. I only bought it 2 years ago. You should buy me a new roof. You know, they're less likely to do that when they know you were really there for them. All right. So what was I telling you? Oh, okay, here's where I'm gonna move to. Go down to M3, tenant occupied property. If you're selling income property, then, and it's tenant occupied, that's it. It is what it is. You're buying with the tenants in possession. You certainly want to find out if there's any tenants that are behind in their rent. You want to find out what the rents are in writing, what the security deposit is in writing, so you can relay that to your buyer. So your buyer can make good decisions on whether or not they're interested in the property. However, if you're selling a condo or a single family residence, or even a duplex where your buyer is going to occupy one of those units, or well, even a fourplex. Let me say this. If you're buying a property that your buyer is going to occupy, that has a tenant in it, you either want to make it clear in the contract that that unit or that house or that condo is to be vacant, should be 7 or 10 days prior to the close of escrow. The reason being is you want to be able to do the walkthrough of the property, which your buyer is entitled to in the last week of escrow. God bless you. And you want to be sure you have time to disapprove something, like the tenant's not out yet, or well, they removed the sinks and toilets when they moved out, or they broke the windows, or whatever the heck happened. So you want time to do your walkthrough and make sure they're out and the property is substantially in the same condition as when you first viewed it. Now, sometimes when a house is owner occupied and the buyer is going to occupy it, the seller can't be out ahead of time. But they're the owner, seller, and they need a day or 2 or 3 to move out, or they ask for a rent back for a week or a month. Lenders generally will allow a seller to rent back for a month. If you're in a situation where your buyer can't get possession on the day of the close because it's not vacant and it can't be vacant, then you should have a lease agreement for your buyer and a deposit. Sometimes you can't get a deposit held from a seller. They're resistant to that. Most sellers are regular people like us. They're going to leave 3 days after the close. They're going to leave it relatively clean without damage. But sometimes they can't or won't move out in those 3 days. It doesn't happen often. It's rare, but when it does, boy, is, you know, you get hell on earth with your buyer and everything. So that's why you don't want a tenant to stay in, because once the seller's got his money and you're stuck with a tenant, you're looking at an attorney. And then today, the court seemed to lean on the tenant side rather than the homeowner side. So I remember in the old days when we were selling short sales, how many years ago was that? 10?
08?
08. Short sale was an owner was living in a property, they owed 500,000, it was only worth 400,000, went down in value. So when you make an offer, you tell that seller, well, I'll buy it for 400, and the seller will go, okay, you can buy it for 400, but I need to get my lender's approval to eat that other 100,000 they're not going to get. Well, in those days, when I did this, it took about 90 days to 120 for the lender to agree to the short sale and close the escrow. Well, this seller had a real estate license, and she had another office listed because you can't earn money on a short sale. The owner can. And she said, well, we said, seller to vacate the property 10 days prior to the close of escrow and before the buyer walked through inspection. She said, no, I can't do that. I'll move out 3 days after the close of escrow. My buyer said, that's okay with us. I remember Jeremy. I said, Jeremy, let me tell you something. Here's a lady who's a real estate agent. She's savvy. She's living in this house. She's not paying the lender. She hadn't paid the mortgage for 12 months. Well, they didn't kick people out. The lender just took it in the shorts. That was what happened. It's the way it was. They had too many of them to go after everybody. So I said, this lady is not going to get any money out of this sale, right? She's not getting any money out of the sale. The lender's going to pay all the closing costs for her, my commission, escrow for her, going to pay everything, and going to even take $100,000 loss. And this woman said, oh, I'll move out 3 days after the close. Can you see? Tell me what you see happening.
She's gonna stay rent-free.
Why should she move out 3 days after the close? She just burned the lender for 12 months. And she says she can't move out 6 days, 10 days. It's going to be 120 days before, 90 to 120 before you have to move. But you can't move in 84 days, but you can move in 93? No. I told Jeremy, this lady's not moving. He goes, well, I don't want it. So that's what I mean about thinking ahead of what's going on. I didn't want that. And I sold them a house. They bought a beautiful house in the Highlands for $400,000. It's now worth $800 because that was in a depressed market. So those are the kind of things you're going to learn by talking to each other, coming to these classes, listening to what's happening out there, going to meetings, at least on Zoom, because people will bring up something and you go, oh, and it'll click and it'll stick and it'll make you better. And you'll do transactions sooner, they'll stay together, you're gonna earn money, you're gonna be happy, and your clients are gonna love you, and they're gonna refer you to other clients. So beware of tenants in possession. Page 3, up at the top, P1. Mark whatever you want included. Now, these are not deal breakers. So if a stove is built in or an oven is built in and dishwashers and garbage disposals, furnaces and air conditioning, those things are appliances that are going to stay. But if there's a washer and dryer and a refrigerator, you can ask for it, but you have to check it. And if there's a freestanding stove, like an old house might have an old, how many remember those O'Keefe and Merritt stoves? They're about 500 pounds, they're beautiful, but they're not built in. Well, you don't assume they're gonna leave it. You gotta ask for it. If your client wants the stove, the refrigerator, washer and dryer, it's usually not a deal breaker. They will just counter it out. I say, well, look, I'll sell at this price, but I'm not gonna leave the refrige. It's a Sub-Zero and I just bought it. All right?
I have a question on that one. Is
Okay.
this supposed to be signed by an agent or by the buyer?
What page?
9, number 9. Because I remember there's another form that the seller must sign, like everything that comes in the house, like something. with the
Well,
seller closure agreement.
usually on a single family residence, you don't have an inventory list. Usually an inventory list would be on an income property, you know, like you got 9 units and they say, well, we got 9 stoves, 8 refrigerators, 3 window air conditioners. Maybe, but on a house, usually there's not an inventory list.
Oh.
Now, sometimes in the listing, it'll say stove, washer, and dryer is included, and an extra refrigerator in the garage is included, and a portable air conditioner in the baby's room is included. Sometimes they'll include personal property. Personal property is that property that's not attached. All right. Let's see now, Q1 NHD. We always not always, but generally, we're gonna ask the seller to pay for, the home warranty and the NHD reports. On Q4, we're gonna say seller to make sure smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and water heaters are braced. Everybody who doesn't know what a braced water heater looks like? Everybody knows the two straps, the pressure relief valve, downspout. Okay, so that's what it should look like. But if you don't necessarily have to know, because your buyer's gonna have an inspector who, if he's any good, he's gonna tell you about smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, earthquake gas valves on the gas meter, low flow toilets. What else? Those kind of things that need to be done to a house. Now, let me tell you something. Move down to Q4, Q5, and Q6. Many agents, obviously, smoke detectors, you're gonna have seller, government required point of sale inspection or report. And now in LA City, that's a 9A report. In Lomita, they have a small a report about water. I think Redondo Beach has some kind of report. I think Carson and Compton have some city reports regarding occupancy in garages. Right, Patty?
Yes.
Carson, because it's common in some of those communities where people rent their garage for people to live in. It's illegal. And those cities to cut down on that, at the point of sale, they require an inspection of the garage or any outhouses to make sure they don't have people living in them. So there's obviously city point of sale inspections or reports are required, but look at Q6. Government required point of sale corrective remedial action. More and more agents, well, first of all, I'm finding that some agents don't check that. And I personally have stopped checking that. And if you do check it, some agents are going to ask you to remove it, because I don't know what it means. It's ambiguous. If I sell something in Anaheim, I don't know if there's some government required point of sale corrective or remedial work needed. And so a lot of listing agents go, look, I don't know what that means, and I'm not going to commit my seller to do something that I don't even know if it's needed. So we're taking that out. However, during your inspection period, you can call City Hall, you can call whoever you want. You can find out if there's some other special requirement in this community. And then if there is, you can request it in your request for repairs.
That's a question to the buyer.
No, well, what I'm telling them, as you're writing an offer for a buyer, you may or may not want to check that, because some agents miss it and let it go. And if you write it in there and they don't take it out, you go through your escrow and you close it, everything's fine. But I'm telling you that a lot of agents are removing it and making it a counter to say, I don't think it applies. I don't know if it does. We're not going to go with it, but you could inspect and find out when you're in escrow, and then you let me know and request if there is some special government thing we have to do to this house.
So you put the onus on the buyer to check it out?
Yeah. Because do you know if there's Rancho PV has some point of sale corrective remedial actions required on some houses in some areas?
No,
I mean, do you know for sure they don't?
I know they do in LA. LA, you got the smoke detectors.
Well,
the
but that
water
falls
scanning.
under Q4 and 5.
Yeah.
See, Q6 is some additional.
Yeah.
So,
So Q6 is something like if there's something wrong with electrical that doesn't.
I don't know what Q6
I think
is.
maybe something to do with the radon, like in Rancho Palos Verdes.
Well, I don't know, does the city have some requirement that you?
possibly, because I know there's a lot of radon, like gases in, there's problems in those cities.
It's starting to pop up, I'm an East Coast realtor 100 years ago. Everybody had radon in the house because they have basements and it's a gas that comes out of the rocks or whatever. And I believe in the last 5 years, I've been seeing people wanting to know in my PV office about radon.
Really? Yeah, some people, like you said, those doctors will test the
Those
air.
doctors, they had a brand new baby, they tested everything,
Yeah.
everything. From radon to.
You're probably gonna need to get that baby off this planet because, oh, he's never gonna make it.
So for
So you're suggesting that we would leave it blank unless we were to like reach out to the city and there's a special circumstance?
I'm saying that you can decide as the agent writing the offer whether or not you wanna check it.
Okay.
But knowing this, some agents, it doesn't, I've never had it come up in a transaction. I don't know if there are some city other requirements that I don't know of. I know about the earthquake gas valve in LA City. I know about smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors.
Shatterproof glass.
Yeah,
Sliding
yeah,
doors.
I know about that. I know about water heater strapping, but that one is like, I don't know if there is something. So if you put it, if you ask for it and nobody takes it out and the escrow closes, you're fine. Keep in mind that some agents are gonna take it out, like me, because I don't know if there's something and I'm not gonna commit my seller to it. But if you find out about something that I don't know about, you can ask for the remedy and we'll consider doing it. I just don't want to commit them, and this is what I've other agents tell me. I used to just check all three of those. And half of the time, the agent would delete it, and my buyer would go, wait a minute, why won't they do that? And it's like, here's the thing. It doesn't apply, but if there's something they don't know about, they're not gonna commit to do it. We could check with the city, find out if there's some special requirement on the houses in this area. One time, I had a builder. I sold him a lot right at the end of 4th Street, right before the gully, 4th and Patton. And it was LA County. And in the old days, in that gully, they used to bury garbage.
Behind the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they claimed there was methane gas. You know what methane gas is? Do you know, like, what's that, where they used to bury garbage out along PV? They then made it just a forest in there, but they have these pipes up that are burning methane gas. So he had to build the house foundation with a plastic membrane for any methane gas that would go under that house. He had flues that went through the house, and that was a requirement.
Inside the house?
Well, it was in the wall, and they were only just a flue. They said it's not likely, no, I don't know if there was one or more than one, but he had to have a plastic membrane in the foundation that would not allow methane gas to come up except through these pipes that went through the walls, out through the roof. So you see, there was a requirement.
Isn't that similar to what they have in Torrance? I don't have a lot of experience there. Then they have, in parts of Torrance, have, they call it the sandy section or something?
Well,
Is that a gas? What was that?
well, the Torrance was a prehistoric lake. And they have adobe soil that cracks and contracts, and it just
Expands.
expands, and you have to disclose when you're selling in that area that the soil does this.
Yeah.
But I don't know about the gas. See, we don't know everything, so we have to talk to each other, and if you're selling out of area, you better find out. Like an agent here I got a call, they want to sell something in Redlands. Because her client saw it and she wants to write an offer, but they didn't want to go to Redlands to see the house. How can, you don't want to go to San Diego's too far for me, I'm just gonna write the offer. You can't represent your client and you don't have the time to go and It's too far? Well, if it's too far, then it's too far for you to represent them. You get in a lot of trouble. So you're gonna sell something in San Bernardino Mountain, you gotta go look at. I drove all the way to, I don't know what mountain, Bear Mountain or something. 2 hours to look at a $60,000 cabin for a friend of mine who wanted to buy it. And I drove back and forth to do the inspection, back and forth to do my avid, and I made peanuts. But if you wanted, either I'm gonna do it or I'm not gonna do it. I can't sit here and go, well, it's not much money, so I'll do it from here. No, you do it right or you don't do it. Simple as that. Refer it. All right. So much for Q6. Now on Q12, 13, 14, we always, well, it says, you know, preparing disclosures, the seller does that. HOA transfer fees, we ask the seller to do that too. Seller pays to get the HOA documents for the buyer to approve or disapprove. So you gotta ask the seller to do it. That's another thing. It's understood, every listing agent knows that it's generally speaking the seller's responsibility, but if you don't ask and you forgot to check a box because you're going too fast, let me tell you, as soon as there's a little wrinkle in the deal, somebody's disgruntled with somebody else, somebody stepped on somebody's toes, somebody offended somebody, they'll start looking for, well, then I'm not, you didn't say I'm not doing this. Well, then we can cancel. And it could have been avoided had you been thorough. There'll be enough little disagreements and renegotiations and friction without causing more by being a little sloppy or careless by going too fast. All right. Q18, I always ask for a home warranty plan paid by the seller, issued by buyer's choice. I try to get the buyer, usually escrow, you give it the seller's choice, title, seller's choice, even NHD, seller's choice, and many listing agents will even require the home warranty to be the seller's choice. I try to ask for buyer's choice because I always give it to Sean at First American Home Warranty, because when there's issues, she's right there for me to resolve it. Sometimes the issue is a toss-up, like they don't really have to cover it. It's kind of a borderline. It's easy to say no, but they'll generally cover it anyway. So I like to work with somebody that gives me a little extra care. So if you start to develop a relationship with obviously our escrow officer, our lender, our Rana at Fidelity Title and Sean, these are people that we do a lot of business with, and they are there for us when we get into a bind or when it's a toss-up problem. We kind of usually get a little extra care.
I just had an incident this week. I didn't even know that we had a home warranty plan on a home in Rolling Hills I sold. It doesn't include the refrigerator.
No.
Home warranties do not recover unless it's built in.
Well, you specifically pay for extra coverage.
Yeah. So what we did is we paid for extra coverage. We paid a little extra included. Of course, 6 months later, there's a big refrigerator problem.
Yeah.
So you don't assume, I assumed it was
Yeah.
covered. It wasn't.
Yeah, sometimes we've been told that you might put enough money there, like in this case, we got $600. That might have been enough to cover the plumbing, electrical, the appliances, and a freestanding refrigerator, and maybe a washer and dryer. But if you didn't ask for the refrigerator, washer and dryer to be covered, you just asked for standard plan, just because the money was there for it doesn't mean you're gonna get that coverage. So you might wanna specifically say buyer to choose upgrades. and maybe $700 and, or to actually say, well, we wanna cover the pool, you have to pay for pool and equipment coverage. Washer and dryer and a stove are freestanding, you have to pay extra for that. So that's another thing, and you know, these are, might seem minor to you, but let me tell you, when you close escrow with your buyer who just spent all their money and they got this big monthly payment and they found out that their refrigerator is not covered or the washer and dryer is not covered,
Guess who pays?
they're gonna be upset. And that's not fair, but if you had discussed it or thought to ask for it, and then if they denied it, your client could have paid for it, or you could have paid for it. Or your client just said, that's okay, if it breaks, I'll just buy a new one. Okay, we cleared the air, we know what we're doing. All right. We're going to end at 3. I think most of that, what I wanted to say has been said, but I got a few more things I can get in. Obviously, on page 4, property addendums and advisories, if you got a mobile home or tenant occupied properties or something, there's addendums that attach to this to clarify what's going to happen with that specific type of property.
Does that include ADUs?
Well, I don't know if an ADU is there, but if you've got an ADU on the property, you want to find out that it's got a city permit and that, you want to inspect it to see that the plumbing, electrical appliances are working.
Because they become very typical now.
Yeah, it's common.
Whenever they're building ADU.
Yeah. You just want to be able to make sure they're permitted. All right, moving to C on page 4, buyer seller advisories. Obviously, buyer's investigation advisory is always included. They're going to sign that advisory. They're advised to do an inspection. Very, very, very important today is they're going to sign the wire fraud advisory. That tells them how to handle wiring of their funds, because there's a great deal of wire fraud. And if that happens to one of our clients and that money is gone, you don't find it, and it's a big problem. So at least make sure before anybody sends money anywhere that they're signing, which comes with this contract automatically, right, Maria? The wire fraud advisory has to be signed by your client as well. Fair Housing and probably Consumer Privacy Act. So those forms are just automatically added onto this contract when they sign. And on 5, we talked about the initial deposit. You should try to make it 3% of the price. You need to read every paragraph in here, but I've got a couple of 2 or 3 things I want to point out. So I'm going to jump ahead to page 5, paragraph, well, let's do 7B. The property is being sold in its present as is condition. Make sure your buyer understands that the seller has no obligation to fix or repair anything. The offer is being made based on as is condition. The buyer has a right to inspect, and after that inspection, they have the right to disapprove, cancel, and get the deposit back, request monetary or repairs, and either come to a satisfactory agreement or cancel, get the deposit back, and move on. All right?
So I got a quick comment on that too. And it's as is conditions, then people rewrite it again.
Yeah.
Already built in the contract, but then they rewrite it. Does that change anything?
Nope. But sellers always want to, well, if I take this right, I'm not going to make any repairs. And we explained to them, the offer is written already as is condition. However, they have the right to inspect and disapprove the condition or request repairs. But you have no obligation to do the repair, Mr. Seller. Sometimes, well, put it in the counter anyway. Let them know it's as is. And then they usually do the repairs anyway. So you just, no point in making a fight out of, okay, we'll repeat it. It's as is sale. All right, you see seller remaining in possession after the close. I told you about you, if it's just a day or two, all you need is a short seller in possession agreement. Usually with no deposit. Usually there's no problem, they move out in a couple of days. If they're gonna stay longer, or you have reason to believe that they have to find somewhere to move into, or just some red flags in your head that something's not right here, you really should, you should get a rental agreement and a deposit. So that if there's a problem, you've got, your buyer has some funds to take legal action.
So besides the SIP,
Well, if you're over 30 days, I think the SIP isn't gonna work. So SIP is seller in possession. SIP is for just a few days, isn't it?
yes, up to 29.
29 days. All right, but I still at 29 days, you need to decide, and you should speak to your buyer about it. You want to ask for a deposit. Just in case they leave it dirty or break something moving out or don't get out in time. You know, you should address it. Even they have the right to ask for a deposit if they're going to stay that long. Sometimes that could be a deal breaker, but
Aren't we supposed to notify the insurance company that they're in there?
yeah, actually, that brings up something else. Sometimes the buyer has to make arrangements with their insurance company that I'm gonna have a renter insurance policy for the first month of my ownership, and then I'm gonna have a homeowner policy. I've heard about, but never experienced, a tragedy where the buyer had a homeowner policy, they hadn't moved in yet, the owner was still in the property. There was a problem and the insurance company didn't cover it because they said, you lied to us. You're not occupying the property. It's occupied by a previous owner and it nullifies our insurance. So, doesn't happen, maybe once in a million, it's like winning the lotto. You know, but if it happens to you, it, you know, you'll wish you had heard about the problem. Thanks. Let me see what I want to. Well, let me tell you this. The buyer has 3 or 4 major contingencies in a normal transaction. Contingent upon approval of the physical inspection, which either you approve or disapprove it, or you come to an agreement on what the seller will do for you, whether it's repairs or compensation. Once the buyer is satisfied, he signs a removal of that contingency. Once the buyer signs removal of the inspection contingency, he cannot go back and complain or ask for another repair or credit. So they shouldn't sign that removal of contingency for the inspection until they have a written agreement of what satisfies the buyer and seller both signing it, all right? Next contingency is the appraisal contingency. So if the appraisal comes in at value, then the buyer can sign a removal of the appraisal contingency. Once that's signed, you can't go back and complain. It's very, 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 very rare that a lender will pull the appraisal, but sometimes they have an appraisal review where they say, oh, the appraisal came in at value and everything's fine, but it's going into review and it'll be in there for 3 days. Occasionally, the review fails and they don't approve the appraisal. A lot of agents don't want to remove the appraisal contingency until they check with the lender to say, is this appraisal final or are they going to review it? Because if they're going to review it, I'm not going to remove the appraisal contingency until you tell me they reviewed it and it's fine. Okay, the third one is the loan approval. This one occasionally gets touchy. That's why you want to be working with a lender that you know that is reliable and trustworthy and will stand behind what he tells you. Because when you remove that loan contingency, you're probably removing all contingencies by that time. You might be 17 to 21 days into a 30-day escrow. Once you remove loan approval, and assuming if it was a condo, you've already removed the contingency on approving the CC&Rs, bylaws, rules, regulations, et cetera, on the condo complex. And you looked at the preliminary title report and it's clear and there's no problem there. So by the time the loan is approved, you're probably removing all contingencies. Once your buyer signs removal of all contingencies, it's a done deal. There's no getting it out and there's no getting your deposit back if something goes wrong. Now, I'll tell you what happened to me. We had a $12,000 deposit. It was like a $400,000 sale in those days. 3%, 12 grand, that was about. The buyer removed all contingencies and said, look, we got to move in. Saturday, can you have your seller move out on Friday? And the buyer put all of his money into escrow. There's 130 grand in escrow. And he removed all contingencies. So I usually don't do this. And I told my seller, well, he got all of his money in escrow. He's removed all contingency. His lender said he's approved. I guess you can go ahead and move out. So he hires a moving company, moves everything out. The buyer's wife quits her job the week of the closing. The lender does this. They'll verify credit and employment the last week sometimes. Found out she quit. They didn't qualify without her income. They pulled the loan, didn't close. My client looked at me and said, Sal, why'd you tell me to move out? It cost me $4 grand to move out. Oh, Chuck, I'll pay that $4 grand. Don't worry about it. You're gonna move back in, and we're gonna keep their $12,000 deposit. Well, the guy wouldn't release his $12,000 deposit. So let me show you a paragraph here. Page 6, fourth paragraph from the top, H. Removal or waiver of contingencies with the offer. Buyer shall have no obligation to remove a contingency unless seller has provided all required documents, reports, disclosures, information pertaining to that contingency. If buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all required information from the seller, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. If buyer removes or waives any contingency without an adequate understanding of the property's condition or the buyer's ability to purchase, buyer is acting against the advice of the agent. So it's very important. By the time you're removing all contingency, you got to know what you're doing. You got to be sure. Let me find the clause. Deposit. Ah, here it is. So the buyer wanted to cancel and get his deposit back and all of his money back, and my seller was damaged, wasn't he? So paragraph H on page 11, effective cancellation on the deposit. If buyer or seller gives written notice of cancellation pursuant to the rights duly exercised, In other words, if they cancel properly under the rights of the contract, to the party, the deposit is released to the party entitled to the funds. Well, the buyer removed all contingencies, so who's entitled to the deposit funds? The seller. So it goes on to say, entitled to the less any fees paid to escrow. Well, there were no fees to escrow. Fees and costs may be payable to the service providers. They weren't in this case. A release of funds will require mutual signed instructions. So the funds don't go anywhere unless both buyer and seller sign where they're going. Seller release the instructions from the parties, or a judicial decision, small claims court, or arbitration award. All right, so they can either mutually agree where it goes, or it can go to court, maybe small claims court, to who gets it, or arbitration. But here, a party may be subject to civil penalty up to $1,000 for refusal to sign the cancellation instruction if no good faith disputes exist as to which party is entitled to the deposit of the funds. So what that means is the seller, the buyer couldn't refuse to sign the cancellation because he had no good faith reason to get his deposit back or to not sign the cancellation. So I emailed the other agent. I said, well, look at paragraph H, and you signed liquidated damages and you removed all contingency. Here's what we're gonna do. We've got $130,000 of your money that we're never, ever, ever gonna give you. And we're gonna go after you for an additional $1,000 for not signing the cancellation, unless you give us the $12,000 today. That very day, they signed cancellation release of $12,000 to my client.
Sal, have you ever seen anybody ever collect that $1,000 in my 40 years?
No,
I've
no,
never
it was
seen
just a threat.
No.
No,
That's an interpretation.
well, let me
That's
tell
right
you,
or not.
usually, I think every time that we've had, which is seldom, you go to the mat with a big problem. Usually, one of the two people are more reasonable and they go, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want to, they want to get.
But you know, people
Yeah, sure.
kind of get tough initially, and then they when they calm down and they cool off, they realize, do I really want to spend a day in arbitration? I mean, really, here, look, I'm not gonna win, here's your money. So that's usually how it goes. So we're done with today. I think I hit what I felt was some of the high points that you need to know, but you can see all the way through this contract, there is so much. I don't know if you can see the highlighting on yours. I put highlighting on mine, but I might have Xeroxed yours before I highlighted it. Okay,
This is my favorite, so I have highlights.
but by the way, you can't cancel and get any money or any money back until, this is important, you have to give a notice to perform. Let's say a buyer hasn't removed his inspection contingency yet, and he had 10 days to do it, and he hasn't done it. The buyer can't go, oh, well, you didn't remove your contingency in 10 days, so I'm canceling. Or he also can't say, well, you didn't remove it in 10 days, so that means you approved the condition. No, that's not what it means. The seller must sign and notice to the buyer to perform. And there has to be a 2-day notice. So if he wants it to happen on the 10th day, on the 8th day, say you have 2 days to remove your inspection contingency. So that they have to either remove their inspection contingency in writing or make the request of what they want. And then the seller, by the way, does not have to respond to the request for repairs. Doesn't have to agree to do anything. He could say, nope, remove your contingency or cancel and take your deposit and go away. That usually doesn't happen. They usually make some kind of concession. if the buyers ask for too much, sometimes they'll say, no, I'll give you $1,000, otherwise forget it, or I'll give you $3,000, otherwise forget it. And they usually will come to an agreement, move forward to the appraisal, move forward to the loan, move forward to the walkthrough and the close. Most of the time, if everybody stays calm and level-headed, we can help resolve most problems. Gordon or I or another experienced mentor or experienced agent in the office. That was about, any questions?
Sal, you had mentioned about the disclosures, that once you release the disclosures, whatever, the disclosure release. The only difference where you can change later on is if there's been a material change on the property. Then you can change it, otherwise you can't alter.
Right, if there's a new disclosure after you've removed contingencies and signed disclosures, if they say, oh, by the way, my air conditioner just broke.
Yeah.
That's a whole new start.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't approve that. I want a new one installed, or I don't want to buy it, or I want a $5,000 credit. We gotta work this out. So notice to perform. Oh, now, if a buyer, everything goes well and they're not close, and they removed all contingencies and they didn't close escrow on time, you can't cancel. You have to give them a notice to close escrow. And that notice is 3-day notice to close escrow before you can send out cancellation. So that's why it's important for you to continue to read everything, highlight it, go to the class at the board when it comes up, buy the RPA explanation booklet at the board, maybe $30, it's well worth it. Because understanding the purchase agreement is the very most important thing to keep you out of trouble.
Page 14, what if the seller doesn't want to sign the arbitration of disputes?
Well, let me tell you, that's
Most lawyers
interesting.
don't.
Yeah, here's what, I'll tell you a story of what happened and how, is Robin here still?
I'm dealing with 3 attorneys. Lawyers don't sign it.
Well, here's the
They're
thing.
gonna sue you, they'll let you.
The buyers, the liquidated damage limits your buyer's liability in this transaction to the amount of the deposit. So it is not small. Obviously, that guy 12 grand on 400,000. Sometimes it's 20, 30 grand deposit, but it limits, it puts a ceiling on what you can get from the buyer if the buyer defaults. That's in other words, goes all the way to the end, removes all contingency, then doesn't close and moves out of state. And he says, the heck with you. All the seller can get is the deposit. So if the buyer initials that and the seller initials, they're agreeing that the deposit, whatever it is, 1%, 2%, 3%, that's the limit of the liability of the buyer. Now, it could be more than 3% if it's income property, non-owner occupied property, commercial property. You can have a 10% deposit and the seller might lose, the buyer could lose the whole 10%. But if it's a single family residence going to be occupied by that buyer, 3% is the limit of the loss the buyer can experience. Well, sometimes a seller will not initial that. Well, if they don't, I think if you wrote the offer, you want to know why the seller didn't do it. Because oftentimes they're an attorney or a paralegal or knowledgeable enough to know that they have a little edge on the deal because they can wreak havoc with the buyer.
Solid, if you don't get both initials, you don't have a contract.
Well, but let me tell you that that's true unless there's a counter, and I'm going to explain a couple of pitfalls to that. This is important. If the seller accepts the offer the way it's written and signs it and initials everything except that clause, it's not a contract, just like Gordon said. Cause there's an initial that is initial by one and not the other. So there's no deal yet. However, if the seller writes a counter and says, well, no, the sale price to be $952,000, escrow to be 30 days on, and then signs that and signs a contract but doesn't initial it, then it's a contract, but the buyer's not protected under the liquidated damage because the counter says any paragraph in the contract that requires two signatures, buyer and seller, where there's only one signature is hereby excluded from the contract. So one time, well, I tell my buyers, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that. I wouldn't buy it if the seller's not gonna initial it. So you make your decision, but here's, if a dispute were to arise, you know, there's no resolution of what the penalty is gonna be. There's no limit. So you make the decision. Most of the time, they'll say, well, if you're not comfortable with that, I'm not either. So I said, let's counter back and ask them to initial it, because then they might go, oh, they're not gonna buy it unless okay, I'll initial. So what happened here in our office about a year ago, you know, sometimes counters fly back and forth before the contract comes back, fully signed. Well, we're not gonna accept that offer unless you pay this, and we gotta increase your down and your deposit and the escrow and whatnot. So the buyers agreed. Then the whole contract came back, it was given to our TC, Robin. And it's a deal, and we opened escrow, or they opened escrow because it was theirs. They were the seller's agent. And Robin said, oh geez, they forgot to initial this clause. So, which happens sometimes. So she sends it back, oh, you guys forgot to initial this. They go, no, we didn't forget, we're not initialing that. Well, wait a minute, the buyer didn't want to do that. That wouldn't buy, well, they've already signed the counter and it says there, any pair, yeah, but you didn't give it to us. Oh, no, you had it. No, yes, you did. No, I didn't. So what happened is the buyer goes, I'm really leery. These people are attorneys. I don't want to buy it. What are we going to do? And I said, I got an idea. Do your physical inspection and ask for a $50,000 price reduction. Because they wouldn't cancel. They go, well, we'd rather buy it, we want to cancel. We don't want to buy it without that clause signed. They go, no, we're not canceling, you have to buy it. Okay, so they did the inspection. I think they asked for $50,000 price reduction and a bunch of repairs. And the seller said, you're crazy, we're not going to do this. Okay, let's cancel. Well, we don't want to cancel. Well, then initial that paragraph. Okay.
Goes around.
Wow.
So if you, maybe you would have to ask for 100 grand or something ridiculous to say, okay, then let's cancel. No, we don't want to. So there's ways around, but you don't have to, sometimes is the agents wait too long before they come to us with their problem for whatever reason. Either they don't know they have a problem or they're hoping it's going to go away, you know. They don't go away, they just get worse. So you got to come to one of us old timers and say, what do I do now? And we'll tell you what to do.
So if you come to me, I send you to Sal, right?
Yeah, no, we'll give you the pistol. All right, you see 2 hours, I can't cover all this, and 2 hours is enough for you listening to me. But you could call me, I take calls all the time from agents, and I help everybody, so you're welcome to call me whenever you need, except you, Alan. I'll call you for help.
I call you more often than you call me.
Hey, you're welcome. Hey, I'm gonna get some pizza now. It's my turn.
Thanks, Sal, like, right into this one.
Yeah.
Are you down here?
We used to sell a book at the boardwalk. Yes, if you have a plan, you look up the book. Yeah. Smaller version.
My daughter lives up in San.
Oh, it's about 30 minutes away. 30, 45 minutes away.
I'll be down here.